Rick Wilson, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Royce, great to be with you.
I really appreciate you taking the time, sir. I know you're a busy man.
Well, I'm happy to be with you and ready to get to it.
You know, it's day one, week two, Flood the Zone. So I thought, what a great way to start with your insight. But where to start is the question.
Well, look, I think what we're encountering right now is the classic Steve Bannon statement: "We're going to flood the zone with shit." That was their overt and stated policy in the first administration, but they didn't have the people around him who could pull it off. Partly because he had mature adults in the room as well as the crazies. And now it's just the Trump hotties. It's just the intense core. It's just the people who are going to salute smartly and say, yes, sir, when Trump issues an executive order that may be illegal or freezes all federal aid funding to law enforcement, cops, science, health, all those things. These folks that are remaining around him are absolute loyalists. They are not they're not independent actors or thinkers, and they don't put the oath they took to the country, when they were sworn into these offices. I as a former federal employee, I swore an oath not to the president, even though I was a presidential appointee, but to the Constitution. And these folks don't believe in that. They believe in Trump. So they're going to do what he wants and implement these things. And so we're going to be in this constitutional and political crisis, I think, for some time now.
Now, is it, in respect to the cutting of the federal funding, is that just about lining the pockets of the wealthy, or is there something else going on there?
They are seeking maximum disruption. They are seeking as much chaos, as much confusion, and as much pain as they can. They're also trying to do something at a pretty fundamental level, which is to set a precedent that the executive has unlimited power. For instance, all these grants, they're all funded and they're authorized and appropriated by Congress. They're not just money Trump gets to hand out or not hand out. So right now, we are about to see this thing taken to the Supreme Court, I think pretty quickly. And even this Supreme Court, unless they want to throw all of the Constitution completely out the window, I think they're going to end up in a situation where Trump is told, no, this doesn't work. You can't do this. Which he is notoriously, really accepts that very, very, very well. He's great at taking criticism. So should work out tremendously.
Well, but he weaponizes that. So that's, in many ways he really does. I mean, for him, he always makes it work. It doesn't really matter. It's kind of remarkable, no matter what you throw at this guy, that he manages to turn it around and utilize it to stoke his base.
Look, that's the beauty of being where Trump is, and that is that the beauty of being where Trump is fundamentally comes down to not having to care about results, not having to care about the end state, not having to care about the impact that the things he claims he wants to do will have on real people.
But taking a step back, I mean, it's a show, and I question how we got here. And it's not just Trump. I mean, look at Congress. Everybody is so performative. How did we get to the point that our leaders are focused more on the theatrics than actual working class issues on both sides?
Well, look, I think that is a shift in our political and national culture. It has a lot to do with the decline of social media, or of regular media, and its replacement by social media. It has a lot to do with the way in which America has changed all of its news consumption habits, where we're no longer looking for news to tell us what's happening or to give us a perspective on what's happening. We now, as a people, tend to look for news that we now have people who tend to look for news as something that validates their beliefs or their decisions.
Right. The echo chamber.
Correct.
So, and then it becomes a battle of perception versus reality. So going back to the notion of flooding the zone, how does one even begin to navigate? Because you've got, and now I'm going like right to the bottom of my notes, but this is what we're dealing with. You've got Dr. Phil out there on immigration raids, okay, purely for the optics. Not only is it a sad display, but I mean, it's literally, these are things that are normally going on that are now just being ramped up for the sake of television. Mm-hmm. And it works. It's propaganda.
Look, the sad part about propaganda is that propaganda works. Okay. The sad part about the sad part about propaganda is that it is an effective and understandable and explicable and terrible thing. It does work. It shouldn't work. It's not good that it works. We shouldn't like that it works, but it sure does work. And nothing about the culture we're in right now is making us more stable as a nation. It's not making us more stable as a community or as a country. And that problem, I think, is really difficult to rationalize and to understand, and how we fix it is something that smarter people than me are going to have to really all decide, just how we're going to move forward as a country. If we're going to believe in facts, if we're not going to pretend that lies are the truth, if we're going to believe in the legitimacy of empirical information and data and evidence, we're going to have to abandon some of that highly effective. And it is, look, and both sides play the game. All right. I'm not being a partisan here. Both sides play that game. The Republicans play it with a much wilder degree of intensity, but that is something that we've really got to think hard about. Does the political payoff of those things in the end, is it worth the destruction to the country that we are going to inevitably face because of it?
Well, it's become so vitriolic. I think of the imagery of Gavin Newsom meeting Donald Trump at the airplane. Mm-hmm. And, for all the things that the two of them have said about each other, you could look at that and go, well, they're putting everything aside for the interest of the people. But are they? Or is it just accepted that, listen, this is the level of vitriol we have to engage in to get elected, and behind closed doors, it's all good?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's nothing voters find more enraging on both sides of the fence when elected officials behind closed doors are basically like, yeah, we're all in the same tribe, we're backslapping, we're all friends here. And I get it. I understand, because Republicans are told the Democrats are communist pedophiles who want to destroy your way of life and bring in 1 million immigrants to replace your job and steal your dog and marry your wife. Democrats are told that Republicans are, every single one of them are, neo-fascists who are going to kill their LGBT kid. And when you see them shucking and jiving together in this era, this is not the civility of Washington in the past. This is not an era where you can play the game of saying both sides are the same and they're both just the same, flip side of a different ideological coin. This is a very dangerous moment. And if we normalize the authoritarian movement and slap them on the back when the vote is done and the lights are off for the TV cameras, I think that really gives Americans a very depressing kind of outcome.
Would you agree that the real danger is not so much the individual, a la a Donald Trump or any one said leader, but the fact that all of this distracts from the real issues and keeps us so far from accomplishing any meaningful legislation.
Oh, look, we have a partisan problem legislatively in this country, where the two sides are far apart ideologically. We have a practical problem with legislation in this country that lobbying has triumphed in Washington. If you pay the right amount of money to the right lobbyists, you could get Osama bin Laden a bridge named after him. Okay, this is a pretty corrupt system, and we should be unhappy with it. We also try to do too much and not enough in Washington. We try to pass bills that are 5,000 pages long because it's going to be the one thing we're going to get done this year, and it doesn't work for people. They don't do single subject bills or tightly focused bills anymore. They're always these what they call gravy trains or Christmas trees. Everybody wants to hang something on it. Everybody wants to put another car on the train. Those things all have led us to a point where the distractions actually make us feel better than watching the failures of a system that should work better for everybody.
Right. But it's almost like Congress legislates on the pork, not on the substance.
Oh, God, yes. Oh, please. Congress is vastly, fundamentally more interested in what's coming home to my district than they are in any other aspect of governance. I mean, a few want to pass things about, the economy or climate or jobs or what have you. But the vast majority are like, how do I get to the next step up in my career? How do I take this home to my state or my district and say, look what I got for you. Look what I delivered for you. Look what I brought you. All of those things are incredibly, money is incredibly powerful in politics, not just from donors and whatnot. It's powerful for politicians because it gives them it gives them something to say that they've accomplished. I built a bridge over this river. I fixed that highway. I did these things or those things. And that's as old as politics. That's not anything new. That's not anything amazingly, shockingly new, but it makes us cynical, but it is a reality. But we used to be able to work around that reality. We used to end up doing some good things along with all the political things.
But we used to be able to meet in the middle. There was a sense of decorum.
There was, and look, I can tell you when I worked in government in the older Bush administration, way, many decades ago now, I had to deal with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, and we would do congressional delegations to places to go to military bases or travel somewhere, and all of that stuff at the time was, we disagree on big things, and we disagree on some loud things, but we agree on protecting the country. And they could get along on things where they wanted to protect the country or wanted to help people. Look, one of the most unusual alliances I've ever seen in politics, and it's actually one that to this day I find kind of heartening in a weird way. Back in the day, Orrin Hatch, who at the time could not have been a more conservative Republican, and Ted Kennedy got together to do education reform back during George W. Bush's first term, before 9/11 happened. And were the Republicans completely happy with the bill? No. Were the Democrats completely happy with the bill? No. Was it a pretty good bill? Yeah, it's pretty good. It was a compromise. It was a thing where people of good faith got together and said, let's do something. Let's fix some problems. Let's accomplish something for people. And they did. Now, we don't have that kind of incentive structure anymore in our politics. No one in the Republican side of Congress is going to give a Democrat a leg up, and vice versa.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know how we get back to some level of that desire to actually accomplish things, compromise, meet in the middle. I don't have to hear you agree with me. But let's celebrate the differences.
Right. But people, if they don't hear from members of their constituencies, if they don't hear from people in their states, if they don't hear from people in their congressional districts, if they don't hear from their friends and their family, stop screwing around, get to work, do the right thing, they're going to be up there in D.C. living in a sort of independent bubble. And in that independent bubble, it's going to cause, them to be able to ignore the entire thing. They're going to be able to ignore it as long as they're good in Washington.
Well, that's why we need term limits. But I'm always amazed how, even when they attempt to talk about working class issues, irrespective of party, I myself as an independent, I've never bought into the idea of I could vote down a line. I will vote to whoever's speaking to the issues that I want to vote on. I'm just kind of, we've reached this point where I question why we as voters accept the notion of donating to campaigns. Like, if we stop donating, I understand there's big money, but why are working class people reaching into their pockets to support politicians? Why isn't somebody taking the opposite slant and going, I'm going to run on $0 and nothing but social media, and I'm going to show you how to take money out of politics?
Listen, that is not far off. That is not far off. We are in a world where all of the ways people once communicated in politics, that we all understood and that were explicable, direct mail, yard signs, TV, radio, cable TV advertising, even digital advertising. I'll give you an example. Donald Trump went on Joe Rogan this year and reached 55 million people. Mm-hmm. We are entering an era where this was, some people call this the podcast election. And I don't think we're quite there, but we are very close to there. We're very close to social media and non-traditional media taking over as the primary venue of intellectual, the primary intellectual framework of how we think about politics.
And it's funny because it circumvents all of the traditional media laws. He can go and sit on Rogan. Anybody can go and sit on Rogan for 3.5 hours, and there's no media issue there.
Yeah, I mean, and look, to reach $50 million or 50 million voters cost real money if you do cable TV advertising or digital advertising. That on cable. But, well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. You would have to spend a lot of money.
Yeah.
A lot of money. Or you can go sit your ass in front of Joe Rogan. Or you can go on Call Her Daddy. Or you can go on Barstool. Or there's a billion podcasts in the world now. God knows I have 2.
Yeah.
But all of that is, we're in the middle of that change. We're in the middle of that transition. I don't know when that transition finishes or if it goes back some. Because we are in an era where that has been a really weird and ugly evolution for a lot of people who don't understand that the world is changing. The politics are changing. We're not in the same country we were 10 years or 5 years ago.
Well, and then it opens up the whole conversation when you're talking about all these different platforms. There's misinformation, okay? And there's a desire to regulate information and the spread of misinformation, and then there's just censorship. So it becomes a very, very murky space to navigate, and the spread of information too fast, which we saw in this past cycle, is enough to move the needle. When you have an electoral college, you don't need much. If we actually had a popular vote in this country, then we could actually leverage, I think, some of that. I don't know how you feel about that.
Look, I've said this a lot over the years. People are always like, we got to get rid of the electoral college. And even if you think it's the most meritorious idea in the world, and I can argue it left and right, I can argue it up and down, it is a constitutional provision. It is overcoming it. You can't change it just legislatively. The National Popular Vote Compact does not address it. It does not work constitutionally. So if you're going to constitutionally do it, you have to have a constitutional amendment that will take decades to do. And the Republicans will fight it every step of the way because now they look at the Electoral College map and go, this isn't bad for us. So I it's an interesting thought experiment, but it's not, I don't think it's possible.
Well, then, so what's the practical solution to getting, people in there that actually want to get the job done and not the clown show?
Look, you've got to start electing people at the state and local level first. You've got to build up a movement of people in the country who are serious people, who are adults, who want to get stuff done, who are not here just for the dumb, stupid incentives of trolling on Twitter or trying to raise more money on email. Those things have to be treated. Those incentives have to be treated as what they are. They're kind of poisonous for the country. There's a reason why being in politics has become a rich man's sport. It's expensive to do it. It's expensive to live in D.C. You can't live in D.C. on the salary Congress pays you. It's become a rich man's game where money talks and bullshit walks, and I mean that on the Democratic and the Republican side.
Right.
I mean, you've got a group of people in the Democratic Party who are fabulously wealthy, and same on the Republican side. But all of those things are, what we talked about earlier, if you end up in a world where communicating in ways that don't require you to go out and spend $100 million or $20 million or $5 million of your own money, if those things become more prominent as the way we campaign, you will see people who are better able to go out and leverage a great message or great character or a great policy in some way that they can't right now.
And, you say all that, and it just makes me think that that's why nobody's focused on working class issues, because they don't need to be.
Right. They really don't. They really, again, sadly, they don't need to be focused on working class issues because they can buy their way out of any problem.
Okay, and that's fair. But just from the perspective of getting elected, going back to this last cycle, the Democrats just failed to speak basics to working class voters on core principles. Joe Walsh retweeted something the other day. It was a clip of Obama talking about immigration. And you're just like, wow, how did you all just lose the mark? You don't have to agree with everything that they say, but it's quite obvious that they've just lost touch with, look, I'm from Bucks County. They've lost touch with Bucks County voters.
Sure. Listen, here's some tough love for my Democratic friends, and I've said this and written this a million times. There is a belief among highly educated, affluent Democrats that the American middle class is crying out to read an 800-page policy plan on climate change or gun control or any other of 100 issues that they think are really compelling. At the end of the day, those issues for working class people are luxury goods. At the end of the day, the guy who's thinking, how am I going to fill my truck up with gas to get to the job site today? He's not thinking about climate change. And look, that may not be a good thing. You can argue that. But he cares about lower gas prices. He cares about his job. He cares about taking care of his family and the economy. Economics and this cluster of economic issues, affordability is definitely one of them in this day and age, and opportunity. Those are issues that always dominate what we call the most important problem panel. Every survey that does a political baseline goes out and asks what we call the MIP, most important problem. What's the most important problem to you and your family? And the vast, vast, vast majority in every survey, throughout the history of every survey, is the economy. They don't talk about the economy in a A to B way. They talk about it in an A to Z way. So they'll say, instead of saying we're going to make sure good jobs here in this community are brought back, instead they say we're going to close your coal plant because you're hurting the climate, and then we're going to train you to become a holistic solar panel installer or some BS. And honestly, voters and workers have just rejected that messaging. They don't believe it. They don't think it's legitimate. They don't think it's sensible anymore. And Democrats need to do a better job on it. They need to be more practical and less lofty.
And what scares me is they don't really have anybody in their stable. Look, I used to think a third party was the solution. Now I think, and I would imagine you would agree with the sentiment, now I think we need to fix both parties before we even worry about anything else.
Look, both parties need to reset on the most fundamental levels. The Republican Party, if I were king, the Republican Party would reset to being what it claimed to be for generations, which was a party that was about protecting constitutional rights from the overreaching power of the state. And now they are the state, and they want to overreach. For the Democrats, they want to talk about being the party of working Americans. Well, get back to being the party of working Americans and stop worrying about whether, college protesters over the Gaza issue are going to tank your entire campaign. Be tougher again with people. Go back and be the leaders that you could have been or should have been. Look back more about guys like Truman and Roosevelt and JFK, not this sort of modern, sort of ephemeral, somewhat effeminate, presentation to working class voters. It doesn't. They are not. Working class voters are not easily persuaded that some nerdy academic has the solution to their life. So both parties need reform by far. But look, I'll say this about the Democratic Party. For all of its flaws and for all of its inability to win a lot of big elections, for all those issues, for all those problems, it's not an authoritarian movement. It's not under the thrall of a guy who is a frank and overt, autocrat. It's not possessed of the kind of crazy conspiratorial lunacy that a lot of the Republican Party has been infected with under Trump. So all those things, I think, are both parties have flaws. One party is not a party that believes in the Constitution, the rule of law, or the American Republic, and that's the Republicans right now.
Right, but the Democrat Party,
I find sad because I'm a former Republican.
Oh, I know. I can only imagine. I mean, and look, and that speaks volumes. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because for you, after all these years, to still be where you are speaks volumes to where we are. It'd be very easy for you to go right back to your party.
Oh, many times. People have said, why don't you go back to the GOP? Why don't you try to change it from within? Why don't you do this and that? The problem with trying to do that is that there is no appetite for it in this world. There is no setting. There's no setting inside the Republican world where they want to reform, where they want to change. They believe that they're winning right now. And while they are winning in the shortest of terms, I look at it as a long-term failure mode for the country and for themselves that I think is going to be very hard to overcome.
Well, it's very destructive. And the desire to, or the willingness to say anything to get your way is very, very dangerous. But then I look at the Democrats, and I gotta call it the way I see it. You're talking about saving democracy, and you basically circumvent democracy. You didn't have a primary. You could talk about Biden dropping out too late and all of this, and you could point fingers there. But to not even have the opportunity, how can you look voters straight in the face and tell them we need to save democracy and then literally anoint Kamala Harris?
Well, look, the nomination process of political parties is a dark and weird art, and that process was done by delegates to the DNC from the states, and they recognized that the clock was short, and so it wasn't a matter of planning. It was a matter of desperation.
Sure.
They understood after the Biden debate in July that an emergency had occurred, and you had to put something together quickly. I understand political exigencies. They exist. I get it. I have less of an issue with that than I have with the fact that, he said he was going to focus on being a one-term transitional president and decided to stick it out.
Right.
And that could have been a very different outcome, I think, if Biden had said early on, I will not run for a second term. Look, and I could have made the argument, and many very smart people did, that Biden's the one guy who's ever beaten Donald Trump. It's the one person who's ever beaten him. And by God, if Joe Biden had been 5 or 10 years younger, I think we would be in a very different spot today. But it is what it is.
And here we are. And now we're going to spend the next 4 years just trying to navigate, again, the difference between reality and all the optics, all the perception.
Yep. It's a tough go. It's a tough go. Nothing's easy in this country right now.
No, it's not. I want to just kind of switch gears for a minute. I want to talk about China.
Sure.
I don't know how much you know about what I do, but so I'm actually have been a full-time TikTok creator post-pandemic.
Yep.
And I find the level of propaganda. Now, mind you, I sat in TikTok headquarters and they told us it would never go down this way. And that was like 3 weeks before it happened.
Sure.
But I find the level of propaganda coming out of China to be so dangerous and so abhorrent. And I am so conflicted that I have literally more or less just stopped using the app, which, look, we're already kind of up in the air as to the fate of TikTok. But I look at this from the larger perspective that we are losing to China rapidly in this country. So kind of a two-part question. First part is, do you think this TikTok ban will hold? Okay. And any other thoughts you want to opine on that? And then the second half of that is, how are we actually going to respond to China? And I mean that like from the educational perspective. We are losing footing across the board. This whole DeepSeek announcement is rattling the market.
Yeah, as it should. As it should. Listen, we examine what these guys at a Chinese hedge fund did with 50,000 GPUs, 50,000 H100 GPUs. They built a model based on a lot of open source software that anybody can do. And it is providing a competitive space for a paid product from ChatGPT. And, as somebody jokingly said the other day, who could have seen the Chinese coming along and undercutting pricing of an American product? That's never happened before.
Never. But tell that to Jack Ma.
Yeah, right. But the degree to which we fail to understand that there's no moat around intellectual property anymore. There's no. I mean, the idea of LLMs and recursive learning with AIs and reinforced learning with AIs is an idea that's out there like gravity now. And so people can throw resources and creativity and entrepreneurship at a problem, or you can go to the White House and try to put together a $500 billion deal that'll take 10 years to do And China by that point will have lapped us 5 or 6 times. And look, there may be a point if AI, if LLMs transition to AI, which transition to artificial general intelligence, where the machine is actually thinking, to artificial, to actual ASI, to fully artificial superintelligence. If that's in the hands of the Chinese, I think the world's in a lot of trouble. If it's in the hands of the Americans, it may still be in some trouble, but it is something that we need to really consider as a nation. How many eggs are in this basket? Where are they? Where are the financial incentives to do better than we're doing now on how to fund AI? How do we look at China with realistic eyes? On the one hand, China has an enormous economic engine. They've got an ambitious global agenda. On the other hand, their economy is built on a incredibly rickety foundation of a market and real estate bubble and of a trade bubble that is unsustainable. And they're having a population collapse where 50 years from now, China will be a quarter of what it is right now.
And still have us beat at the rate we're going.
Oh, listen. The global demographic collapse is everywhere. But China has been about to beat us my whole life, just as one time Japan was about to beat us. And we tend to innovate our way out of the problem. But that was an innovation based on the fact that the country had more unity. It was innovation at the time based on the fact that the country looked at problems as things that were solvable, not as ways to hurt the other side politically. And where the rule of law made companies and individuals feel like they were going to invent things and profit from them, and they'd be protected from foreign markets and foreign competition by the fact that they were better at competing, not by tariffs or trade deals or anything like that frankly don't end up giving you the same level of assurance that you're going to beat them based on your intellectual capacity and your creativity, rather than the illusion that you can put up a trade barrier or something that's going to work.
Yeah, and I feel like when it comes to China as a whole, you made the comment that we've always sort of been like, China's always kind of been on our tail, and we'll innovate our way out of it. But I feel like we don't have those innovators, and we don't talk about the American dream. It's almost gotten to the point now that like waving the American flag is MAGA, and patriotism can't even be celebrated by the left, right? Well, so the idea of the American dream is dead.
The idea that Democrats should take back the flag is the simplest, lowest priced cost of entry in anything right now. The idea that the Republicans own the flag is bullshit, and Democrats who worry about it or say, oh, it represents extra, shut the hell up.
It's wild.
Understand that Americans and American iconography and American culture does not hate where we came from. You can acknowledge the problems of our founding, and there were many. You can acknowledge the problems of the country, and there are and have been many. But that doesn't mean people don't love this country, and they do, left and right. And it was a classic error of the Democrats way back in the 80s, starting with Walter Mondale, who walked into the trap Ronald Reagan set for him on patriotism and the flag and all those things, the pale pastels, as they said. All those things are easy lifts, and Democrats should be better about them. We produced in 2020, when Joe Biden just had gotten the nomination, we produced one of the very, very first ads. And that first ad showed Joe Biden walking by a line of troops. He salutes them smartly. Fighter planes flying overheads, eagles, flags. And a Democratic friend of mine reached out to me and goes, I would have never thought to make the ad look that way. I'm like, yeah, I know. Get over it. Be better.
That's the value of the Lincoln Project.
Yeah, we like to think so.
I know so. Listen, I mean, Going back to Trump's first election, I mean, that was wild. And what you all broke with video there, I mean, that was, you want to talk about tapping into the next generation of who's going to get elected off of social media and viral ad buys and all of that, or I should say viral earned media.
Right.
But I mean, you all crushed that the first time around. And I mean, you're going to be leading us for the next 4 years.
We look, we've been around now for 5 years, and no one thought we'd be around for 5 years, least of all any of us. I thought I would be off watching my grandchildren grow up and writing more books. But we are in a position where we have a unique role to play. In 2022, we helped win 17 races across the country that were important to protect, protect constitutional offices around the country. We, in 2024, we did our job. We moved our Republican voters that we could move, but Harris fell a lot further short with getting her own people to come out than anybody could have imagined. So, in all this, we're a class of political warrior that doesn't always have a good home in the Democratic Party, and we're not Democrats, and that's something that is important, for people to bear in mind. We know how to do this. We want, if Democrats want to win, I tell them this a lot lately, care about people like Democrats, but learn to fight like Republicans.
Yeah.
Because when you're fighting, what you care about doesn't matter. When you're fighting, you've got to fight. So,
a couple more questions for you, and then I'll let you go.
Sure.
Kind of go rapid fire here. So, on that tangent, do you think Gavin Newsom is a good candidate for the Republican Party, or excuse me, for the Democrat Party? Great candidate for the Republican Party.
Yeah. No, I don't. I disagree with that. I don't think he can win a national election.
Right.
California has become much further away from the American working class. Look, working class voters have been fleeing California for a long time. It's become a state of increasingly wealthy and educated folks, and that's all fine and good, but it doesn't have the vibe. And telling the California story now is a lot harder than it used to be. So I don't think he's the guy for 2028.
It's amazing to me how the state that's supposed to sort of lead the nation in innovation has fallen so far behind. I spent 2 decades living in LA.
Right.
It's sad.
Dude, I love California. I love Californians. But it is not a state that has the same emotional and cultural connection to the rest of the country it once did.
Yeah.
Those jokes about the liberal Californians, it's now tinged with kind of pity for the rest of America. They believe it, and look, a lot of what they believe is BS. A lot of what they believe is that California is a blasted Mad Max hellscape. It's not, but it is expensive. It is highly regulated. It is hard to do business there, and it is culturally different than the rest of the country now in a really fundamental way.
Yeah, it's very true. Do you think, I don't know how valid these rumors are, that Bob Iger wants to take over for Karen Bass? Have you heard anything about that?
I have not talked to anybody around Bob that said anything about that. I haven't heard anything about that.
I mean, that's just,
Listen, let me tell you something about Bob Iger, though. Bob Iger is a guy who, if the managerial shit hits the fan, you want Bob Iger. He is a serious person. And look, there will always be a cycle in, I think, in highly progressive states and areas where, and I know this because I've lived through this when I worked for Giuliani in New York back in 97 the first time. The city had a 5.25 to 1 Democratic registration advantage, but crime was through the roof. It was nightmarishly bad. 3,000 murders. It was horrifying. And the city needed something better. And this is pre-crazy Rudy, obviously. But he said to them, I'm going to come in, I'm going to fix the broken windows, I'm going to clean up the streets, I'm going to get the porn shops out of your neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. I'm going to stop the street crime. We're going to cut the murder rate. And sure enough, he did and won a re-election, with almost 80% of the vote. And LA had Richard Riordan back in the 2000s, where they felt like a moderate Republican businessman could come in and be better at the job. Sure enough, I think we may be in that cycle again soon, whether it's a Bob Iger or someone else. That's a city that has right now a suite of problems that it's not just going to be about whether you are, from the right community or whether you have, the right set of progressive values. It's going to be much more likely to end up with people saying, hey, we have got to fix what's happened with these wildfires. We've got to deal with a collapsing infrastructure. We've got to deal with an economic problem where the industry is dying out there, as we watch, and it's going to be difficult to make an argument against, especially if it's somebody who's not a MAGA conservative. It'd be difficult to make an argument against somebody who's more practical and managerial in LA in the mayor's role.
Well, I certainly think that's what he wants. Whether or not he'd be good for the job is another story, and I'm not going to go on a rant on what he's done to the company, to the Walt Disney Company. But what I will say is that the American dream, going back to that, something that Walt Disney, built his company on, the very foundation of the American dream. Mm-hmm. I look at the landscape as a whole, and I go, we talk about the innovators, and they don't exist. I mean, where is the city of tomorrow? Where is the smart technology so that we don't have these wildfires? Why aren't we having power lines underground? Why aren't we developing the future of tomorrow? Why don't we have World's Fairs where we're inviting these companies to come together and to celebrate innovation?
Listen, I have a fundamental belief that innovation and prospective leadership that is about a future that is big and that matters and that gives people a sense of possibility has been undercounted in this country for a very long time. And I think that there's a need for it and a desire for it that has been unaddressed in both political parties.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I don't see anybody, look, not to sit here and talk about Elon, I really don't want to, but he's not an innovator. He's not a Steve Jobs, let alone a Steve Wozniak.
No, he's an acquirer. His great competency is the acquisition of other properties that people have started to build. Mm-hmm. And he's sort of like a shark. He always has to move on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And didn't found Tesla, didn't found SpaceX, didn't found Twitter, on and on and on. For all those things, right? For all that, accepting all that for what it is. His idea that he's Thomas Edison now, I think, falls very short.
Very short. Very short. What do you think about Mark Cuban? I think Mark Cuban would be a great candidate for the Democrats.
I think Mark Cuban is absolutely one of the most stellar people out there in our politics right now, because Mark has a good heart. Mm-hmm. And he's got a big brain and a big heart at the same time. And that's not something we get every day in this world. That's not something that we are now accustomed to in America, because we've come to believe that you can't have both. But look, the guy's he's reforming drug prices in this country.
Right.
With something everyone says is impossible, can't be done. You can't innovate out of that problem. Well, he's innovating out of the problem. Mark's a good leader and a good man.
But then you look at a guy like that and you go, well, he probably feels like he can do better from the outside than deal with the BS of the inside.
Yeah, could be. And I haven't talked to him about this, but I can tell you, I'd vote the hell out of a ballot for Mark Cuban.
Oh yeah, I'd be out there knocking on doors for that guy. You kidding me?
Yeah, no kidding, no joke.
For real.
No joke.
That's an innovator. I mean, there's a guy who's a working class guy who built something from nothing and has not lost sight of being a working class guy.
Correct. That's correct. And God bless him for that.
Yeah. I agree. Let's go back to TikTok real quick, and then we'll wrap it up. So you think TikTok's going away? What do you think the playbook is here? And what's the real motivation? Is it just about senators and Meta?
No, it's partly about Meta, but I think a big part of this that we really have to be honest about. We have to really we have to be honest with ourselves about this. A big part of this problem is the CCP is never going to give up TikTok to someone they can't control. It's never going to happen. The data is too valuable. The product is too valuable. And only 20% of their income comes out of the U.S. I suspect we are going to get a offer from Elon and a group around him. And, you know, for all that Elon Musk has no ability to control his tongue about any subject anywhere, you'll notice he never says a hot word about the Chinese. Never says a thing. Never criticizes them. Never gets angry about them. It's all hunky-dory with the Chinese.
He's probably got Xi Jinping on speed dial.
And look, he's got some of his biggest factories there, and his battery supplies come from there, all these things, right? I think there's going to be a buyer's group that gets put together, and I think it's going to be ugly, and I think it's going to be shitty. But I think Donald Trump is good friends with a guy named Jeff Yass, who owns 17% of ByteDance. Yass is also a major contributor to his campaign. And I think he sees that TikTok in the hands of Jeff or Meta or Elon or some combination of that group would be great money for him and great influence for him. The question being, will the Chinese government allow it?
And the most that they probably will allow, if anything, is the sale of the U.S. TikTok side of business without the algorithm, which no longer is TikTok.
Without the algorithm, it's just it's a whole nothing burger.
Then why buy it? So that's why I keep going. Like, are we just going to wind up with another 90-day extension?
Look, right now the law is very much that 90-day extension was squeezing the limits of the law that was passed by Congress by a good stretch. Okay, because there is no deal on the table. The law said you could do a 90-day extension if there was a deal happening. There's no deal happening yet. We're not even close to the beginnings of a deal. So it may end up in court, and TikTok may go under at that point. We'll see. It's going to be a tough couple of months for TikTok.
It's not a free speech issue. I know that much.
No. It's very much a money and power and control issue.
Right. Yeah. So, Rick, I want to thank you for your time. I have so much more here to talk to you about, but I know you're a busy guy. Thank you so much.